National Principals Conference podcast series. It is April the 6th, 2021, and I am Jason Heemskerk, a member of the NPC 2021 Convening Committee. At this conference, we are considering what does it mean to do Reformed education on purpose. And in this series of podcasts, we will hear from people who represent 4 different approaches or design models to education. And we're going to learn about how their design model is used to connect the mission and the vision of their schools to unit and lesson designs and the use of time and space and the character of their school community. In this podcast, Stephen Levy, who is a Christian, a husband, a father, and a grandfather, as well as an award-winning educator, is going to present to us EL education and what that looks like in a number of schools and what really makes that philosophy of teaching and learning work. He joins us from the city of Lexington in Massachusetts, and we welcome him to the program, and we hope that you enjoy the discussion that we have. Thank you for making yourself available for this. And maybe we could start just by telling our audience, if you will, a bit about kind of yourself. Like, where are you located right now? What's some of your background history? I did pull a nice blurb off of the CASE website that has your biography with a pile of awards. But maybe you can talk about that. I'd rather have you tell us than kind of read off a list.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jason, for inviting me to talk with you about these important things. I began education in the classroom. I taught for 28 years. I taught in a private school where you stayed with the same class from the first grade through the 8th grade, which was quite an adventure. And I taught in the public schools for another 14 years, around 4th and 5th grade, mostly. I had some honors as a teacher, which more than anything just opened doors to be able to share what I was doing with others. And through that process, I met folks at Expeditionary Learning and was intrigued at the work they were doing. They were intrigued at what they saw in my classroom. And so I began to work with some of their schools in the very early days of EL. And I worked with them for probably 15 years then, full time as a consultant, working pretty in depth with a number of schools. So I would get probably 6 to 8 schools each year. I would visit them 15 to 25 times, depending on the size of their contract, and really work deeply with their faculty over multiple years. So I was very grateful for that opportunity to get to know so many schools and learn so much from just what so many people and great teachers were doing around the country. Then I think 5 years ago, I just felt a call from God that it was time to take all that He had taught me, all that I had learned from so many experiences, and plant it in the world of Christian education. So it was a real call. I left my job. I didn't know what I was going to do or what schools would have me. And since then, I've been working with Christian schools, with CASE, the Center for the Advancement of Christian Education, and with this sort of growing network of schools we call Deeper Learning in Christian Education.
So it's been quite a route then for you, quite a road going in different places. The school where you started, was that you said it was the same kind of group of kids from grade 1 to grade 8. Was that a Christian school as well then, or was that
no?
Just
I've never had.
school?
I never had a chance to work in a Christian school as a teacher.
Okay.
My wife is principal of a Christian school in Arlington, Massachusetts. Sorry, I didn't say that's where I'm from.
Okay.
We live in Lexington, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And she was principal of a Christian school, elementary. And so I've done a lot of work with them over the years, both in teaching some, never as a full time teacher, but modeling teaching and working with their staff. I became a Christian while, I'm sorry. So that first year, the first group of kids that I talked about, that was a Waldorf school.
Okay.
Some of your listeners may be familiar with Waldorf education. There were a lot of wonderful things about that. But when my wife and I became Christians at the Waldorf school, we learned more and more of the sort of discrepancies between the spiritual philosophy behind that school and how Jesus Christ reveals himself through the scriptures. And as it became clearer and clearer that the philosophical and theological underpinnings of Waldorf school was esoteric and not the same Jesus as the one that you and I love, we left the school. We went first looking for a Christian school. We were very excited that, wow, that would be just so amazing if we could put our kids in a Christian school. But I have to say, Jason, it was a bit disappointing as we visited schools in the area. Disappointing in the sense that, yes, they were Christian. And when you ask, so what makes you a Christian school? And it was their Bible program. It was their chapel that they had every day. It was praying before and after each class. It was a number of wonderful things. But as we visited classrooms, it was mainly kids sitting in desks doing workbooks from Abeka, and teachers either lecturing or sitting up in the front of the room doing something. It just didn't feel like it had the life that a school should have if it were filled with the Holy Spirit. So we homeschooled for a year, and then found this school called Covenant School, which is where my wife began to do her work, and that's the school she was principal of.
Right. So, it's then you went to the public school as a teacher from that point.
I did. I was not attracted to anything I saw there in Christian education, and was able to get a job in my town. I was hired in August, and I felt like I was carrying with me now Jesus wherever I went. It was interesting in the public school how to express one's faith in ways that were safe and honored the diversity of our system. I would so I guess the main way is I would listen for kids, and there'd be all kinds of clues they would give you as to their spiritual background or their faith. I also went and visited all my kids. So I visited them in the summer before the year began. So I had a sense of where families were coming from, and I knew which families wanted to have their kids have 3 hours of homework every night, and which families wanted their kids not to have any homework because they're just kids and they should be able to be kids. And I learned which kids, loved horses and which ones played video games all day. I'd see parents interact with. It was just such a valuable process of preparing me to be their teacher. Yeah. But then also, if there were parents who were Christians, I would say, do you mind? Can I have your permission to pray with your kid if there's issues or things that come up? So we had a little prayer closet in my supply room, and with those kids, I felt I was honoring the system by, I'm not forcing them, but if parents gave me that permission, I felt it was okay. I also would sing all manner of praise songs in other languages. So we would sing blessings to God in German and in French and in Latin in ways that kind of covered the message and yet was still bringing in the presence of Christ through the music.
Yeah, so it just makes also for a well-rounded kind of vision of school, right? That's what I'm hearing you express is that you have this depth of knowledge from different ways of doing things. You've seen, of course, lots of things also in your professional life once you left teaching, visiting that many schools, being with inside that many classrooms. Like you've seen it a lot, but also working within the different systems. It gives you that kind of well-rounded bit. And are you still, like, you're working with Case right now? You're still visiting schools? Well, if it wasn't for this um,
Yeah, yeah,
situation we're in right
I,
now.
exactly. I haven't done much this past year, um,
Yeah.
but I was working just occasionally with schools, speaking at conferences. Um, I'm doing some work with TFT, Teaching for Transformation, helping to design some new professional development, and also working with some of their schools.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So when we met it was at the Deeper Learning Conference, I think a couple of years ago, that really kind of gave me a sense of your passion for making learning real, for us. And you had the worst class possible at that point in time because we were all teachers, and teachers, of course, know better than anybody else how to teach. So it is, and so it was a wonderful experience for me to sit in your classroom for a few days and to pick up some of these things. And I think that brought me, your name to mind when we were thinking about this particular podcast for our principals conference, because you you kind of embodied a certain viewpoint and value for how to teach a class. And that was kind of looking with the deeper learning aspect of things. But you've done the bulk of your work, by the sounds of it, in terms of after the classroom with EL education. Could you kind of give us elevator pitch, I guess, or just maybe a 5-minute snapshot of what is EL education? What is it? How does it work? What are some of its core values and core practices that would set it apart from other um, methodologies or ideologies? I'm not sure how to say it exactly.
Yeah, it's a nice challenge. But thank you for the nice things you said about our time together in the Deeper Learning Conference. I think that represents, like, I think the most powerful professional development is that you have to give teachers the experience of learning in the kind of way you're hoping they're going to turn around and teach their kids. Because if they haven't had that experience themselves, then it's all kind of abstract theory. But I think once you experience what it's like to be wildly engaged, to be nervous about the product you have to create, to do powerful field work and meet people and do something that you feel is contributing to a better world, as much as we could do that in a slice of a day. When you get that feeling deep in your bones, that's the thing that when you get back to the classroom, you want to try to achieve and reflect in your own teaching. So thank you for those kind words, and I'm glad it was meaningful for you. EL began in the early 90s as a result of a lot of money from our government and from private business to form what they called break the mold schools. They knew that there were huge problems in education, and it wasn't going to be a new reading program or a new math curriculum or a character education program just adding into what they were doing that was going to make a difference, but it had to be whole school. They were looking for schools break the mold, just some entirely different vision of what a school could look like. So it was a pretty exciting opportunity for every organization that was dealing in education. I think they had 750 applications for this and chose 11 programs, one of which was EL. EL had grown out of a collaboration of Harvard University School of Education and Outward Bound, sort of odd bedfellows in a way. Outward Bound, takes kids out into the wilderness.
Yeah.
But they had a pretty good record of transforming character through the sort of the experience of real test and trial in overcoming obstacles and climbing this mountain or going down these rapids. So they were chosen. They were given a lot of money, and then over the next years began to develop a program. They had a lot of philosophy, but they had no idea what it would actually look like in the school. But I think the idea was somehow, can we take the outward bound adventure where you have this impossible goal and you just, how are we going to get to the top of that mountain? We can never do that. No, we can't possibly get through those rapids. No, there's no way and you have this feeling first of this just is too impossible. We can't do this. And then you realize there's all kinds of skills and content. There's lots you have to learn. There's a lot of teamwork you have to learn how to build, and so you work on those systems. You learn those things, and then you go. And at the sorry, I'm getting. And then on the way, you find that you didn't really know this thing that you thought you did, or there's all this other stuff we need to learn in order to be able to get there. But the goal in the end is that everybody makes it up to the top of the mountain. It's not like we each find our own way, but and what are the implications of that for the way we're going to learn, the way we're going to work together? So this impossible goal, content and skills you have to learn to reach it, building the character and the community in order to make it, then heading out, and then, all kinds of struggles on the way, and then you make it to the top of the mountain. So the idea was, can that be an analogy for curriculum in our schools? What would it be like if we designed adventures for kids to go on that had an end goal? And we're going to get this law changed. We're going to design this aquarium. So a huge, hairy, audacious kind of vision of what we're going to do that kids will think, that's impossible. We can't do that. We're just fourth graders.
Right.
And then there's lots. Then you have to build in, so here's the content we have to learn. Here's the skills we need to learn. Here's the community we have to build. Here's the character we have to have. And through all that, then we head out and sort of model that same process. So EL then began to develop a network of schools. They now have about 160 schools as part of this network. I think they have a vision of education that went against when they began, and for many years at the time, was the measuring of a good school primarily by their scores, their
right.
state test scores. That's what made a good school. So EL has expanded that to sort of 3 dimensions that they focus on. So one is the mastery of content and skills. That has to be an essential part of school. But 2 was an equal emphasis on character development and developing the habits of scholarship, the habits of of an ethical person, the habits of contributing to a better society. So they pay equal attention to that, and truly they do. And then the third, which I think may be more unique to EL, because I think a lot of schools care about academic progress, about character, but EL has an emphasis on the creation of beautiful work, of high quality work, in everything from a kindergarten drawing to a high school essay to some big project that is, in the community. And the emphasis on that, sort of those 3 dimensions, are what all EL schools are sort of committed to and are assessed by. So if you're going to be an EL school, a credentialed EL school today, you have to show in all 3 of those areas how you're addressing those in the achievement of your kids.
So who do you, if I may, so who do you show that to? Like to EL itself? So you flip back to the...
Right. In the same way your kids would prepare a portfolio to demonstrate evidence of their having met the learning targets of any project that you did in class, the school would put together a portfolio of work. And it's a long process of gathering all kinds of evidence to show your academic achievement, to show your character development, to show examples of beautiful work. And then they present that to an EL board that's comprised of EL officials and some guests that we have that come in from outside to be part of the judging. And then the school is granted sort of a credentialed status.
Right.
That takes about 4 years, or at least EL says, if you start work with us, it's about a 4-year process of getting to where you could be considered a credentialed school. You're also then measured by benchmarks, which measure the sort of faithfulness of the implementation of the EL core practices. So you asked about the core practices, which are in 5 areas. So one's in curriculum. and it's about the designing of what we call expeditions. Again, sort of based on that outward bound metaphor. So there's a whole dimension of tools and practices and models around this designing of expeditions. And 2 is on instructional practice. I think when EL began, we just thought, wow, if teachers just could design these incredible projects that got kids engaged and got them involved in the world and were relevant and meaningful, that would fix everything. But alas, teachers could design these great things, but they didn't have the instructional practices to deliver them in a way that really involved and engaged all kids. So the second core practice is all around developing those protocols for engagement to make sure that every kid was involved. And the third was around culture and character. And so schools defining the habits of scholarship and again of ethical behavior, because it's a secular organization, but so it's not, we would call that spiritual formation, but so a lot of attention to how a school does that, how they get that to live in every dimension of their school life, the whole character and culture piece. And then there's a fourth on assessment. And the sort of the thrust of the assessment is how do we equip kids to be more active and responsible for their own development? How do we help them to assess their own work, see how it needs to be improved, and set goals for doing that? So it's not always the teacher assessing the kids and giving them a grade as much as equipping kids to evaluate their work, know what good work looks like, and figure out a way how to get there. And the fifth core practice was around leadership and structures. Because again, we found at the beginning, as soon as we had these powerful visions of expeditions that we would show teachers, and they'd say, yes, I want to do that. And they would try, and then they would say, wait a minute, when are we supposed to design these? Like, are we supposed to do this after school? And you want us to collaborate? So what? But the schools had provided no structures to support teachers in doing that. So we realized right away, this is going to push up against budget. It's going to push up against schedule. And if we believe this is the best way for kids to learn, then we have to make significant changes in those areas. So those are our 5 core practices.
But it gets, just listening to you talk about those, it's every single facet of the school, from we would look at it as the board structure, so that the top of the food chain, if you will, but also for parents need to be on board with this type of thing, right down to the students in the end. So how do you is this typically implemented in like independent schools, or were these typically like an EL school?
Yeah.
Because the organization, we've talked before, you said it's quite expensive to become an accredited school, and this 4-year process plus your the people involved with the training and all that. So is it typically a public school system that would kind of adopt this, or would it be typically a private school that's looking for an edge, if you will?
Interesting. There's very few, if any, independent schools in the EL network. I'm not sure today. Again, I haven't been there for 5 years actively, but there are 2 Christian schools in the EL network now, both in Denver.
Okay.
They're both Catholic schools actually, and they're fantastic. They're real examples of sort of bringing together their faith and EL practices. So one is called Annunciation. And in fact, they were kids from Annunciation when we had our conference in Denver, were the speakers sharing their work with us. Mostly they're urban schools. So the primary focus of EL now is around urban education and helping kids who do not have an opportunity to learn in this way, to make this kind of education available for everyone. That's a deep ethic of EL. Should also mention that they have developed a literacy curriculum, which has been phenomenal, particularly in urban areas, of teaching kids in lively and playful and deeply with a deep ethic of social justice and equity, how to be good readers and writers.
Right.
So, and that's an open source curriculum. You can download that from the EL website, and lots of schools are using that to great advantage these days.
So if you're looking at then the kind of I don't know, mission vision for EL education, um, is there like a one liner that they use, or is it like a because you've talked about these core values or these core practices which hit everything you've talked about there, deep sense of the social justice and the fact that it's a lot of them are developing in urban schools. And so just so that I'm on the same page, when you say urban schools, I'm thinking what we would call them inner cities. So you're dealing
Yeah,
with a diverse population,
yeah,
poverty, um,
yeah,
those types of things, that area. Um,
yeah.
so is that like their core mission then to bring this education to those areas, or is it just kind of how it's developed over time?
It's how it's developed over time. Interesting. I think at first it was not at all at the center of the vision of EL. But we would do work in schools, and often it would be inner city schools that might have access to a grant or to some funding that
Okay.
would allow them. And often schools that were in the worst shape, that were given state money in order to improve. So they had some resources there. And we would do these great trainings around these wonderful expeditions and around all this great pedagogy and stuff. And they would say, "We love that. That's all great stuff. But if our kids don't learn how to read, and our literacy scores don't go up, the rug is gone. The state's going to take us over." So it was of necessity, and it's particularly in working in urban schools, that we had to develop a way to teach literacy that was going to be foundational to our work without sacrificing
Right.
all that we believed in around the instructional practices. And the one beautiful thing about the EL curriculum that we designed is that built into it is the kind of pedagogical practice that just by doing this curriculum, you would be a better teacher.
Right.
And so built into it are the assessment strategies and the instructional practice protocols that make for really effective teaching and engagement for kids. So I think it's a really valuable. It has made a big difference in our in EL's effectiveness around the country, particularly in urban areas.
So I guess it's actually a nice segue into the one of the questions that we have, and that's the impact that this has. Can you pick a school or pick a scenario where you can talk about the impact of EL education and how it shifted it sounds like from what you've said, there's probably a lot of good stories. It may be hard to pick one, especially with the work in, if you're given schools that are, you could say, maybe in the worst shape or have the most challenges that they have to overcome, and then you instill a program and it works, and it's the proof that it works is in the fact that you've moved from 17 schools to over 100 schools. I mean that doesn't happen if it's not effective.
Right.
Uh, so maybe you can share a story or share with us about kind of what's a school that's shifted and changed. Um, they're happy stories. So
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are a lot of those, and many of them today you would find on the EL website. And in terms of the sort of testimonies, particularly of large urban districts, New York City, Denver, Mecklenburg County. I mean, there's just a bunch around the country that will speak about how this curriculum has impacted their not just the reading and literacy scores, but the whole culture of the school. The story that comes to my mind, I think of many, but one in particular was we were working with what was one of the 4 worst schools in Massachusetts by every measure. First time we went to visit their school was closed down because there was a knife fight. There were police on every floor of this school, and it was just a horrible place for learning. And they wanted to work with EL and help turn them around. So where do you begin is always the question. And in this case, we had a practice or an opportunity we called site seminars. And we would take sort of a highly functioning EL school, and we would invite then representatives from around the country to come and spend a few days at that school to see what it really looks like in action. Very powerful experience for many. But in this case, 15 teachers from this school in Springfield, Massachusetts, decided they would go to this conference. And because they had tried everything we would mention to them about, have you tried this? Oh yeah, we did that back, oh yeah, we did that. Oh, with our families can't. Oh, our kids can't. So it's just nothing ever could have worked. But 15 of them went to this site seminar, and it was in Baltimore, and it was a school with kids just like theirs.
Right.
And so they were able to see kids, 100% African American, poverty, being proud of their work, being in circle, challenging each other to higher character standards, apologizing to each other about where they sort of let down, where they fell short, showing academic achievement and pride in their work, doing work that made a difference in their community. And these teachers were shocked to see that this could happen. And no longer could they have any excuse that, well, we can't blame our families anymore. We can't blame the kids anymore. It is possible. And so they sat, and we had a 3-hour meeting in which they were going to try to figure out, where do we start? What do we do?
Right.
And at the end of 3 hours, after considering all manner of highfalutin changes, they decided, we're going to have our kids tuck in their shirts. That was the big plan. And so they went back to school. They shared this, and so, just the whole culture of the school was so slovenly. And so now you had to tuck in. So what's the first thing that had to happen? Teachers had to tuck in their shirts. So that's always how it begins, with the teaching culture. And then they had to be out in the hall, and they had to enforce. So when they'd see kids, they have to call them out and get them to do it. And they were shocked that after about 2.5 weeks, every kid just had their shirts tucked in, and it wasn't a deal anymore.
Right.
And not that the shirts mattered, but what mattered was that they realized that they actually had some efficacy.
Right.
And they thought, every initiative we have ever tried, there has never been anything we've done that we all stuck to it and actually did it.
Right.
You'd be in the faculty meeting, you say, oh, here's what we're going to do, and then you just go do your own thing. But in this instance, everybody was on board. And this was a middle school, 6th to 8th grade. And you could do it 15 times in a row, 15 teachers call them, but if one teacher lets them go, it's like starting over again.
That's right. Yep.
So it was the power of everybody. And I think, and what they realized then was, wow, so if we really do all work together, if we really do have that consistency, if we really do commit to something, we can make a difference in their lives. And then so I just say that as a beginning, because I think it was a powerful story for me. And then they could begin to see, well, what about reading? Like, what if we have a common language for what it means to be a good reader? What if we have some common practices around? What if we have some common character qualities that we are all striving to meet together? But it was the building of that sense. And I think, Jason, of all the kinds of schools I've worked with, the one thing that makes the biggest difference in their efficacy is that everybody's on the same page and that everybody does it.
Right.
Because I've seen classical schools and EL schools and KIP schools and the ones that work are the ones where everybody in the school sort of is committed, believes, and then acts on the principles of that school. So yeah, and they shape them different ways. They're not all equal in that sense, but they have
Right.
power if the culture you're building in your school is stronger than the culture kids are coming from in the streets or wherever their neighborhoods are. Then you have possibility of affecting them. So that's always the first step, is the faculty, um, and so that's
It's
one story.
so hearing you talk about that, it's also you have that drive then also from the faculty. So if you have these 15 teachers coming in, 15 teachers going to visit, that be in a school. Would you say about half the staff or a quarter of the staff or
No, I'd say about a third
about a third?
of
So it's a
the
good chunk.
staff.
They're coming
Yeah, it was
back and
enough
they're
a chunk, and they were leaders in this because they were enough
yeah,
to really carry and bring that vision, and and communicate and share what they saw at the school there. It was
right.
like we have been to heaven. We were going to tell you about what it was like, and it actually does exist, and it actually is possible. So they carried a
Yeah,
lot of passion back. That was essential, though, I think.
yeah,
And I think the other thing that happened is that it often happens as schools transform, is you'll get a handful of people who are just against it and are not going to do
right,
it, and there's where the leadership comes in and has to give the consistent and powerful and unshakable message that this is the way we're going,
right,
and then at a certain point, 1, 2, 3 years later, they realize, oh, this isn't something that's just going to go away like every other thing we've ever tried,
right,
and then they either decide to leave or get with it, and it's the leaving of 5 people that then are replaced with 5 people who come to your school because of the vision you've set and they've seen, and that's the thing that starts
right.
the inertia in the right direction.
Yeah. So would you like looking at we have our audience is mostly principals going in this. What in terms of that impact and the moving forward, what's the I guess it would be fair to say if the principal's not on board, well, that's you're not going to get there. But that's really what you're saying. What I've heard you say, anyways, is that the leadership um, of the school needs to also stick with it. Because I mean, tucking in the shirts, I know what you know. Enforcing uniform policy is like here in my school, and it's like herding cats that have just had a bath. Like they're just they're all over the place with it. Uh, and if but I also realize my role is if I let it go, then everybody's going to let it go.
Mm,
Um, and
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's so you're having by the sounds of it, right? That the leadership also needs to make sure that they have the will, I guess,
yeah,
to
yeah,
to
yeah.
see it through.
I think that's exactly right, Jason. And I think the um, sort of communicating of that vision, number one. So I think when from the leadership, I kind of see it in three parts. So first is engage, and you've got to get your that you have to be able to communicate a vision in such a way that your faculty is engaged and want to do it. So that's often through early kind of professional development. I always do it by just I've got suitcases of student work that I've collected over the years. And just by looking at the kind of books and calendars and cards and um, interview projects, just so many beautiful projects. And when teachers look at what kids have done, that to me is like the sort of introduction I like most, because it's what kids do. It's not like you
Right.
have to do this or that. And then the question is, how do you get kids to do work like this? I want my kids to do work. Anyway, there has to be the sort of engagement first. And then the second is the support.
Right.
So if as leadership you don't provide the structures of support, the professional development, the time for teachers to meet and design, then you can't hold them accountable, which is the third thing. So I think the sort of scale from engagement to support, and then holding accountable. And so how do you keep track of progress? How do you find out what's going on in the best of your classrooms and share that and get that to happen in all of your classrooms? So I think those are key. Another thing, just for the leaders, is it was so different in a school where if I went to do some professional development, the principal was there, and when the principal didn't come. If the principal doesn't come to the teaching practice workshops, it gives, it just is such a message to teachers that,
Right.
this is okay, we can take. But when the principal's there and equally committed to the kinds of instructional practice and curriculum development and assessment, then that makes all the difference in the world. Then it really feels like we are all in this, and it just builds that. It breaks down some of that gap between the they of leadership and the us of faculty.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I've I understand that fully, and it's one of those things where I could just imagine if I were to ask my staff to um, go through PD and then not be there for because I got to golf or something
Yeah,
along those lines.
yeah, yeah.
That's it wouldn't work going through. But I mean that's the impact, and it is interesting also that that concept of where do you start, um, because we always kind of begin with the end in mind, right? That's kind of where you're going. But it's that first step, and the tucking in the shirts. That's an interesting one because it is so simple, but it's also very complex because you're forcing student behavior in a way that they're not used to going.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
you kind of agitate the waters a little bit with a very simple thing, and then but once you've effected a change like that, you've proven to yourself that it's possible. And that's again what I'm hearing. A lot of what you're saying is that in order to effect a change like this, to move into um, to this vision for education, you have to prove to people that it's possible. So you come with your materials. You say this is the work that my students have done. You go to a school and you say, okay, this is your school population, but look at how they're transformed. How they're behaving in ways that you would never have thought possible, and that's that kind of that light of hope, I guess,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
you look forward to. Um, so how do you? But the trouble with that light of hope is that you talk about success with tucking in their shirts, but I'm sure that same school had failures. Like because these are roads that are less traveled, and so they're always difficult. So how do you get past that? How do you move past those
Yeah,
bumps
yeah.
that you have?
Well, I think the second thing is maybe I mentioned it, but just developing this code of character,
Okay,
which many schools don't have, or many schools have but don't pay any attention to.
right,
We're going to be excellent, and we're going to follow Christ, and we're going to change the world for Christ. All of our mission statements have high goals and strong visions often, but you don't quite see how that's living out in everybody's classroom day
right,
to day. So I think developing at least in many of the schools that we work with who didn't have sort of a foundation of here's the kind of character that's going to lead to success in school and in life. So a process leading communities through a process. It involves teachers and leadership and parents sometimes, and the kind of conversations about what really matters to us and those are so important to have that begin to build this sense of a real collegiality among the faculty instead of the general culture, which is kind of volcanic. Everybody's doing their own thing in their own room. So
right,
I think the faculty culture is where it begins. And then the first thing, even before you talk to kids, is how are we as a faculty practicing courage, or humility, or teachability, or seeking Christ? How are we practicing it in our lives collectively and individually? And if we don't hold ourselves to the same standards we're expecting from our kids, then we have no authority to ask anything. So I would say that's the next step, is building this faculty culture. And that's different in each school as you get to know them. In some schools, I would always sing with faculties, again, in public schools, but they were like shocked that we have to sing. And then we'd sing
right.
rounds, and we'd sing, and they saw I wasn't going to give up, and then it would sound beautiful. And then they'd be amazed. Wow, that was so great. I haven't sung since third grade. That was
Yeah,
amazing.
right.
Or having them begin to share their, just even using protocols with staff that they're not used to, or breaking
Right.
up into small groups, reading different things and reporting out. So all the, kind of building that culture, I'd say, is the second thing. And then it begins to spill over, because the same way you're doing professional development with teachers, you're then asking them to go and try that with your kids.
Right.
And
yeah, but then it is very much a decision process that you're going through, and it's top down, if you will, sort of. It's not the district board saying, um, you need to do this. Although by the sounds of it, a lot of your schools are in a position where they have to do something. They're being told they have to do something, but the process of implementing this as a school-wide process, it's not one teacher here picking it up and doing it in their classroom. It is very much starting with the staff and the administration working hand in hand. You pull along, and then by what you said too, like after a couple of years, when people that don't like it realize it's not going away, then they decide that they're going to either sit on the bus properly or get off the bus. To use that analogy that's been spoken somewhere before, right? That's the key. So then the other aspect you have it, and so looking at this from kind of a vision of the people involved in the school. And I think it's a little different when you're talking about public systems than it is, especially the inner city schools. Um, but you have mentioned the parents and the role of parents in this. Is there any involvement, like any direct involvement in terms of the implementation with parents, or is this something that just happens in the school and parents kind of roll with it regardless?
Great question, because the parents are essential. I mean, I know in my classroom where I was doing projects and stuff that was different from what they were used to. And I timed it out. It was about 3.5 weeks where I had to have a parent evening.
Okay.
And 3.5 weeks, because I knew two things were happening. One is kids were going home and excited to talk about school. And parents are shocked, because usually the kids are, oh, it was fine, it was great.
Yeah.
But kids had all these stories to tell about, we did this, and so it was real, and parents loved that. And the second thing kids were saying was, but we don't do any work.
Right. Which worries parents.
Which was very worried. And I couldn't let that get too far along. I had to let enough get, and I also needed 3.5 weeks to have kids produce some amazing work in writing, and it's just really high quality, whatever we did. So then I could show parents what they were doing. And also, so I had to have a parent evening, and I had to take parents through why singing for 20 minutes every morning was going to help their kids get into Harvard, and why we were spending, 3 weeks just drawing straight lines and curved lines. And I had to be able to defend and sort of articulate to them what was behind it, so that even if they disagreed with me, they said, boy, this guy's really thought through what he's doing.
Right.
And so they're going to give me a little bit of grace, because it's not like I'm flippant or I'm just, doing whatever comes. And I think what we have to communicate to our parents, sort of the deep reasons for why we teach the way we teach, or what we teach, how. And I think parents need to feel that, you have been thoughtful about this. And so that's one thing. And they're shocked to see the work their kids have done. My kid has never written anything like, how did you get him to write? So you have to have the pudding there. That
right.
is the work that kids have done. That's really excellent. I think in other school contexts, parents, again, are crucial. So communicating to the parents what this is about. I think a big one is giving opportunities for parents to participate in class when they can, in ways other than just bake sales.
Right.
So because the work is so grounded in the community, and because our projects and expeditions are always towards how do we contribute to a better world, parents can be amazing resources. and or they know someone, or they can be, you're an expert in plumbing or in doctor or whatever. So, or you do a lot of field work. Many of our schools once a week would do field work. By the way, they don't go on field trips in EL. That was
Okay.
one of the first language changes, is
Right.
because a field trip means rah, 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 we're just going out to play. And I went on lots of field trips as a kid, and it just meant vacation.
Yep. Day
So,
out of school.
but we do field work in EL schools, and like a scientist who goes into the field to learn, and it's highly structured, and they've got journals and very specific learning targets for the field work. But we do that often. Some schools once a week, and parents are often sort of involved in being
Right.
able to go out and do real. So there's just lots of opportunities for parents to be involved beyond the bake sale, which I think is important. Um,
Those are both
Assessment is a
two.
big one with parents,
Right.
because if you're going to start, you have a whole different sense of grading. That's not just A, B, C, D, and you're going to really have a standard-based system in which you're really assessing kids based on the standards and the learning targets. That's shocking for parents. They just want to know, So evenings in which you can communicate to parents what that's about, and at first they're very resistant always, but when you do a student-led conference, your first one, and a parent comes in, and that's always a part of the sort of, we don't do sort of often teacher parent, they're always student led. And so when a student can talk about their work in reading and show you an example and talk about their writing and what they're strong at and what their weakness is and what their work, I mean, it's shocking for a parent to hear a kid be able to talk about their own education like that. So they come on board when they see more and more of the reality of what it's doing to their kids than when they hear the idea about what this is.
Yeah. And do you ever have it that a student or even a parent says it's not for me? Like, so we talked about that in terms of teachers. Have you ever had students? In my experience, can also be very stubborn. Um, I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that.
Yeah, I sure have. Sure have.
Sometimes a really good thing, and sometimes it's a real pain. Have
Yeah.
you ever had it that either a student or a parent just wasn't buying it? That
Yeah, it can be very difficult. And it may be, well, you can't be something for everybody. It may be that
right,
you're not going to change. You're going to try to communicate all you can about who we are to the parent. And if they decide, particularly in a Christian school where they're there by choice,
yeah,
they may decide, sorry, this is not really what we're looking for, and that's okay.
yeah,
Um, I used to meet, like when I would do really wild projects. One year in my own fourth grade classroom, and my kids, I taught in a pretty privileged area in Lexington, and my favorite thing was to take stuff away from these kids. And the ultimate project of that was one year they came, and I'd written them a letter over the summer to come with a map of what the ideal classroom should look like. And I had cleared out everything from the room. So they walked in the first day to a totally empty room. And then the year was going to be about designing, finding a way to fund, and they're going to build their classroom. And then through that, I had to get to all my curriculum and content. But I didn't know, so I had a meeting with the parents over the summer. And I just shared my ideas with them. I said, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing. And if they were against it, I wouldn't do it.
right, yeah,
But I had to articulate how I'm going to get to all my science and social studies and reading and writing standards, which I had thought through and had a plan. And so we met, and most of them were excited, and there were a couple who said, I don't want to,
right,
I don't like this. I had a follow-up meeting with one of them. And so it turned out, because I was going to be we were going to raise money by selling stock in our class.
okay.
And
So you're putting yourself on the open market.
So we were going to be on it. You could buy a share, and then we thought we would give you dividends throughout the year, which would be products that students made along the
Right.
way, and in the end, we would sort of liquidate all of our assets, and you could make money off it. But one parent was just so against this. They were very socialist-like leaning, and they just said, "I can't have my daughter be part of this." And so I changed my mind. I said, "Okay, we'll make it a cooperative instead."
Right.
And instead of a corporation, and you can join our cooperative. So I had to meet with the faculty as well. I told my principal about this idea. So, well, you better talk to the faculty. And
Yeah.
I shared with them the idea. And of course, many hated it.
Right.
And they had like 17 objections. But 6 of which were really good. And so I wrote back after this meeting, which was terrible. And I said, "Okay, I heard all of your, because these 5, you don't have to worry about it. It's not, you misunderstood. It's not going to happen like
Right.
that.
Right.
And these 6 things I'm going to change because your ideas were so much, your objections were really important. And I'm going to, so it was that kind of a process of just, again, I guess it's how well you've thought through what you're doing,
Right.
that you can communicate in a way that's going to engage people, or at least they'll give you space to try something.
Right. But that's very much so. What you're describing is where you have your individual classroom. So you're the island, I guess, in the school,
in that
right?
school.
That's
Yes,
yeah.
that's different.
So, but your willingness to be that island in the school to do something different, and I think it ties in with EL. Does it have to do with your view of the learner? It's one of the questions one of the kind of core questions we wanted to get to. So thinking about through your EL lens, but also I think through your personal lens, and maybe even to some extent the case lens. Like what is the learner? Who is the learner for you?
Yeah, great question. I guess and I'll just approach it from the biggest change in my teaching as I grew as a teacher. And I think it was from being very, very central in the classroom to being, I mean, I felt like I'm sort of the sun and the planets revolve around me. And as long as I'm strong in the sunlight, they stay in place. And I was very much, I was passionate and excited, but I led the class.
Right.
I was in charge. And I think for me, all of my work with EL and outside of my own classroom and school began to teach me that I'm not really equipping the learners to be responsible for themselves. They kind of counted on me. I sort of felt like I'm riding a wild horse. I like the horse to be wild.
Right.
But because they know me so well and I've been with them, I know the rein, I can, with little tugs, can get them back after they've been, out there on the edges. Whereas I would see in special classes, so in French class or in music, or, my kids could be terrible.
Right.
And I realized, again, over time, it's not about me. It was just too much about me. And I had to learn how to, it was much harder to equip them to become sort of the independent learners and more responsible for their own learning. So I think that's the journey about the learner that has been most instructive to me, is how do I equip the learner to take charge of their growth and development, and honor the sort of individuality of each one of them in a way that I think I tried to control way too much in earlier days of my teaching. So I think that's what I think about when I think about the learner, and the learner is also not just an individual, but to be part of what EL calls crew.
Right.
So the idea that I am not there just to get test scores and to be higher in my class grading than at the top of the class, but my role as a learner is to be part of a community committed to one another to be able to reach the highest goals and our potential. So yes, I need to develop qualities of these character in myself, but I need to be part of a community where everybody else's success is as important as mine. Um, so
Right.
I think seeing themselves as that kind of a member in a classroom is crucial to who the learner is.
So then, tied in with that, then the um, well, no, I'm gonna go back. So, do you think that your shift? You talked about how your wife and yourself found Christ and became Christian. Did that shift? Was that like part of it? Was it before? Was it after? Like, how does your Christian worldview, I guess, influence your view of the learner?
Uh,
And then also I guess we can move also into the teacher. I think you do a nice kind of blend of both.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I think as a Christian, as I think about each kid and who God made them to be, I'm just so humble about my assessment
Right.
of who they are, and I have to look and say this kid is more gifted in mathematics than I am for sure. Um, I need to sort of get out of it. Um, Let me say it this way: that much more respectful instead of trying to control them into the sort of image I imagined is a good person, the right person. It's just the uniqueness of God's creation and his love for each of these individuals and how he sees them, which is often so, I learn is just so different from my impressions. Um, so I just think my big job as teacher is to um, sort of support, help kids to see who they are in God's image. Try to see that myself, because you have a power as a teacher to see into kids what they may not even know is in themselves. Just like Jesus, I think when he called your name, like he saw and spoke to something in you that you didn't even know
Right.
was there, but when he touched it, it was like, that's who I am. I think there's something about that in kids that we need to find out. We need to ask God for the grace to see them as he sees them, so that we can help support them to become who he made them to be. We also need to work against their grain. I mean, I had a teacher once who told me, one step against their grain is probably better for them or more helpful to them in life than if you just go with their grain all the time. So if you've got a project and you've got kids who's a good drawer, okay, you do the drawing part. Another kid's a good
Right.
writer. Oh, you do the writing part. It's a disservice. Because if that kid really has a gift from God around art, you can't do anything to help. I mean, it's going to be it's bigger than
Right.
you. So
Yeah.
but you can help that kid if you get him to learn how to be able to write a little better, because that's kind of against. So I would always put kids in the opposite role of what I saw their natural gifting to be, because I think the fullness of their humanity in the end, and as much as I can get them to go sort of against the grain of their personality, maybe that's a better gift than if I just let them do the thing they're always good at.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That also comes in from um, you have to really know your students well,
Yeah,
right? That's one of the reoccurring themes that I'm hearing from yourself is that knowledge of student, and that relationship between the teacher and the student has to be a personal professional one, I guess, is the best way to state it, right? You're
yeah,
not friends, um, but you have your roles, and you talked about how you're not the son that they surround, and yet listening to you as you lead students through these projects and making them create beautiful work, uh, you're still central to that.
oh,
I think,
absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
right,
It's an odd irony, I think, that sort of the more structure that you provide and the more guidance you provide, the more you're able to help them be independent. So
yeah,
the idea that I'm just going to sit back and they'll figure it out and is not helpful to them.
Right.
So it's again, the clearer my structures are, in a sense, the more independent and freedom I think they'll experience.
Yeah. So thinking about EL education as, from a Christian worldview, and I know we talked about that. There's not many Christian schools that are in that, um, but do you see the purpose of Christian education and the work that EL is doing? Do you see those able to walk side by side, even if
Uh, yeah,
and,
that's such a
and how
great
does that work?
question. I think about that all the time, Jason. That's my constant refrain as I think about what's the difference between doing this good work in the EL school. They have the same motto that actually had originally before TFT, but this idea of getting smart to make a better world, of doing real work for real people that made a better world. That was all at the ethic core of and expression in EL. And so I see these EL kids doing amazing projects of work that's doing all that, changing the world and everything from the outward sign that you'd see in our best Christian schools. So what is that difference? And I think about that. I dance with that. I don't come up with a glib answer around it because
Right.
I know God's grace can work through all manner of systems and people, whether they call them whatever they call themselves. But I think the difference, the one that gives me the most peace as I think about is the difference of the cross. And if I approach making a better world without having gone through the experience of the cross in my life, then I think I can cause a lot of disharmony and a discord. I think I can be proud and do it out of my motives of my own, pride, and pride is a big one in there. I can be so sure of myself and my ways that I, can be oppressive. I can be so zealous about my cause that I can just create discord in a larger scale than what I think I'm actually helping.
Right.
And so I'm always thinking about this process of what do I have to do. What's my work? I mean, the Holy Spirit is the former of my spiritual identity. I don't do that myself, but what do I need to practice and develop so that the Holy Spirit and that God is able to use me to accomplish His purpose of restoring a broken world? And that's always something through the cross. It means I can't just go and do good. Without first seeing that evil sort of in myself, without the repentance
Right.
in myself, without the humility that comes from the cross, without the at least wounding, it's never killed, of my own ego and my own self, so that I can approach whatever it is in the world with a greater sense of love, I think, because I'm not so egocentrically in it. So I think if a student is doing this work in the story of God's story, like I'm doing this work because I'm participating with God in His purpose to restore a broken world, and I need to follow Him. If I'm really following Him, it's through the cross to get to be able to do part of that work. Then that just makes for a different effectiveness, and it makes for a different context of my whole being. If that's the story I'm in, that's different from, oh, I'm being a good citizen. Oh, I'm
Right.
So I think that's where I end up, kind of as I should, I guess, at the cross when I think about what's the difference and what does that look like if I'm pursuing, to make a better world. What does that mean if I want justice or to do some justice project, first I have to see where the injustice and oppressions are in my own self, and and then I might be able to address something in the world in a way that is cross-centered and not ego-centered.
Right. So would you say that that's kind of like the central tenet in a no, no, let me kind of get to the maybe the last kind of big question, and it's going to be phrased maybe a little bit different than was on the sheet. Um, I want you to pretend now that you have a renewed youth, and you want to start your career over, and you're going to start your career, and what your purpose is going to be to start your own Christian school, and you're going to start from scratch. And I'm going to give you the Ontario Ministry of Education budget, which is seemingly limitless. Um, what does the ideal Christian school that you're going to build look like? What does it have? Um, Maybe not focus on building and things, but in terms of um, your how does it work? What do you hope to do with your school?
That's a big question to end on.
I know, and we so we have about 37 seconds. No,
Uh-huh. I, um, well, the first thing I'm going to look for is I'm going to steep myself in prayer and fasting for 40 days. And then
yeah,
and I'm going to ask for a vision of what God needs in a school in whatever area I'm thinking about. That's of course an exaggeration, but I think growing and I've got to look for some kind of a vision and of why another school. What is it? I don't just want out of myself. Let's have another school. So I want to seek God about that first, and then I want to find some people that I can share that vision and who can help me grow it together, who will become my teachers and leaders. Um, if you walk into my school, you will see beauty everywhere in simple and in complex ways. You'll see kid work that's framed beautifully and honored on the walls. You'll see evidence of the principles and practices that are at the center of the vision of our school, and you'll see kid reflections of how they're practicing those daily. And you'll come into a classroom, and you might not be able to tell who the teacher is in some ways because kids are going to be actively and deeply engaged with one another and in learning about God's creation. You'll come to a whole school meeting, and you'll see a big circle, and you'll see kids stepping forward and teachers who are honoring others who they see have been heroically manifesting the character quality of Christ that we are striving for in our school. And then you'll see some kids get up and apologize and say, I'm sorry for not, I said I was going to do this, but I didn't do it. I'm sorry for stepping on your toes, whatever. You will see many times you'll come into my school and there won't be kids there because I think they will be out actually in the community doing real work for real people. You'll see kids engaged and motivated because the work they're doing they feel is part of God's story in restoring this world that is broken in so many ways. You'll see a lot of reflection, both as faculty and as students, on where we are and how are we doing compared to those high values that we have established, both academically and in character and in beautiful work. You'll see a infusion of the arts in everything. So you'll see kids expressing what they're learning through music, through art, through dance. You'll see the art teacher. You'll see the classroom teacher in with kids in art class because they're learning to do the art too. It's not just a break time for them. And then other days you'll come and there won't be any kids there at all because teachers are going to be working because we built a professional development schedule that gives plenty of time for teachers to do the kind of reflection and planning. If you came in the summer, you'd see us there a lot in the summer. Teachers wouldn't want to come to this school if they just wanted a 3-month summer break because they knew there's going to be 6 weeks in the summer of professional development together that we're going to wow, I'm getting excited. Let's go do it.
I'll start her up. Let's go. No, it is. So what I'm hearing you say is that first of all, what I really liked was the fact that you started with the needs of the area. I think that's kind of a key bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the character of your school is always going to be shaped by the where it is and the what's going on in that area, and then beyond that, you've described a school where there's a high level of engagement on all the different levels, and it's infused. The word is it's infused, and it's not only infused with all the arts, but also with the cross and with a love and responsibility for Jesus Christ. And it would be a dependent then in terms of is it a school that would have a missional focus, or would it be a school that has already a very core Christian populace, and all those things would kind of depend on the needs of the area that you happen to be in. Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you were hoping to bring out yet, kind of reflecting back, that either I didn't ask for about, or that you wanted to finish with before I thank you for your time and your energy on this?
Jason, you asked terrific questions and gave me every opportunity to talk probably too much about this subject that's dear to both you and I. So no, I don't have anything that I want to add other than a blessing to all of you who are listening, and pray that you would have heard something that will be meaningful and alive for you, that will be useful for you as you go back to leading your schools.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Stephen, for being willing to do this for us. We do hope that your work continues to be a blessing in the lives of others, and also a blessing in your life. And yeah, we look forward to, Lord willing, in September when we meet together to have you on a screen, I guess, and to ask you a number of questions, and also to listen to the others involved and continue this bit of a learning journey. No, I really do appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jason.
So,
if the border's open, I'll come join you. I'd love to be there with you.
All right. We'll keep that in mind. It looks less and less likely moving forward.
Oh, sorry.
So,
okay. All right.
Yeah, I wish you Lord's blessings as you continue your journey.
Thanks.
And
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jason.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We are looking forward to the NPC 2021 conference, Reformed Education on Purpose. And we hope that this podcast has been helpful, is an introduction to EL education. And we thank again Stephen Levy for his willingness to join us. And we will hope to see you in September.